It's our wedding day, why isn't the bride and groom here yet? Hurry up. As I was going about my day as usual, my phone rang. Wondering who it might be, I was told something utterly confusing. Wait, what? I got married 3 years ago. I already have kids, so I had no idea why they were saying I was the bride. Huh? From the other end, there was a momentary silence, possibly as taken aback by my response as I was by their statement. We both seemed puzzled. Just when I thought it might be a wrong number, the caller said something completely unexpected. My name is Katherine Johnson, 32 years old. I'm a middle school teacher and I have 2 children, a 2-year-old and a newborn. Currently, I'm on a 6-month parental leave, dedicating my time to taking care of my kids. I'm really grateful to my workplace for being so understanding and accommodating about taking leaves. Though I've gotten a bit used to parenting since this is my 2nd child, it's still a challenge and I often find myself sleep deprived. It's wonderful that my children are lively and energetic, but they can be quite noisy and tend to cry a lot, which means I don't get deep sleep. Trying to ensure that my working husband doesn't get sleep deprived always ends up wearing me out. My husband works as a doctor, and the last thing I want is for him to make decisions with a foggy mind due to lack of sleep. So, whenever our child cries at night, I comfort them in a separate room from where my husband sleeps. My husband might be often busy and not at home, but whenever he's around, he's very involved in childcare. This makes everything feel less overwhelming. On his days off, my husband watches the kids, allowing me to get some much-needed rest. I often find myself thinking how lucky I am to have married such a wonderful person. Our days are hectic, but together, we've managed to build a happy life, supporting and helping each other. Then one day, after I'd managed to get my energetic kids to take a nap and was enjoying a brief moment of relaxation, the phone rang again. Checking the caller ID, I saw the name of a college classmate, which made me feel a bit weary. This classmate's name is Bob Miller. For some reasons, I've always been somewhat uncomfortable around him. Back then, we were both in the same department, aiming to become middle school teachers. We had interacted a few times, and he seemed spirited and motivated at that time. He came across as the life of the party. Since our conversations were mostly about class assignments, I didn't know him that well, and I had no reservations about him. My perception of him changed during our shared internship. During this time, Bob acted self-centered, often disregarding my opinions and even blaming me for his mistakes. No matter how many times I pointed out his errors, he never accepted his faults. It felt like talking to a brick wall, he never listened. He believed he was acting with good intentions, never realizing the inconvenience he caused to others around him. So, even when I corrected him, he remained stubborn, forcing me to clean up after his messes. Thankfully, both our internship supervisor and university professors were understanding and stood by me, allowing me to complete the internship successfully. I grew to strongly dislike Bob after this experience and sighed with relief when our internship ended, thinking I wouldn't have to interact with him anymore. But that relief was short-lived. Because we were at the same internship site, I often found myself dealing with Bob's issues. This, unfortunately, gave him the impression that I was interested in him. He became overly familiar and clingy, acting as though we were in a romantic relationship. I tried clarifying the misunderstanding, but he brushed it off, suggesting that I was just shy. "You're always so kind to me. You like me, don't you?" The only reason I communicated with him was due to our shared internship. Despite my clarifications, his puzzling confidence made him persistently clingy, which really wore me down. No matter how often I told him, his overfamiliarity and closeness always made me uncomfortable. Luckily, graduation was on the horizon, and with the support of my friends, my time dealing with him was relatively brief. My friends played a crucial role in creating distance between Bob and me. After that, due to working at different places, our interactions were limited to distant glimpses during extracurricular activities and school events. Though we hadn't spoken in a decade, I hoped Bob might have matured and reflected on his past actions. However, even the mere thought of interacting with him, especially when tired, was draining. Remembering Bob only brings back negative memories, often filled with miscommunications and having to explain the same thing multiple times. So, I had been avoiding him. But the persistent ringing of the phone disrupted my peace. Thinking it might wake up the kids, I reluctantly answered. Pondering what he could want, Bob's initial words rendered me speechless. "Hello?" After complaining about my delayed response, he said. It's your wedding day. Why aren't you here? Get here quickly. Wait, what? I got married 3 years ago. His words filled my mind with confusion. I hadn't communicated with him in 10 years, so such a message was utterly unexpected. Baffled, I inquired if he had the right person. Huh? When I informed Bob that I was already married, he seemed confused for some reason. I assumed he would soon realize his mistake and hang up, but instead, he made another bizarre statement. We're in trouble. Everything for the wedding is set. Just come over quickly. For some odd reason, he seemed desperate to have me at the wedding venue, which left me increasingly puzzled. You should be talking to your fiance, not me. I thought I was pointing out the obvious, yet Bob kept urging me to come, saying the venue was nearby. I could faintly hear voices in the background, suggesting that the bride and her side of the guest list were absent. Still, I could hear voices from the groom's side showing their confusion. It appeared Bob was genuinely conducting a wedding. Given I had no connection to this and was clearly an outsider, combined with my fatigue from childcare, my patience with Bob's inexplicable behavior was wearing thin. Listen, I've been married for 3 years and have kids. What are you talking about? I struggled to comprehend Bob's ramblings, but tried to stay as calm as possible while questioning him. But Bob didn't give a clear answer and just kept insisting I come to the venue. You have to come. Everything's ready. If you don't, we'll have to pay cancellation fees. Just wear the wedding dress. He persisted. Despite my repeated refusals, citing my existing marriage and current childcare duties, Bob was unyielding. The back and forth continued to the point where I lost my temper and shouted, "Stop calling me with this nonsense." Ultimately, I hung up, frustrated. My rare moment of relaxation was ruined, leaving me in a terrible mood. But why on earth was he so insistent on having me at the wedding? The unknown reason left me feeling uneasy. That night, I discussed the matter with my husband upon his return from work. That's pretty creepy. Given how he doesn't seem to understand things, we should be cautious. He advised, even suggesting we consult the police. The situation reminded him of stalking cases, and he seemed genuinely concerned. I don't think we need to go that far. I reassured him. After hanging up the call from Bob, I began to calm down, thinking that it was just a one-time thing. However, with my husband expressing his concerns, I started to wonder if Bob had any sense of common decency. But considering he was a working adult, I felt that perhaps I was worrying too much. Yet, in the following days, persistent calls from Bob confirmed my anxieties, and I realized that my husband's words were not exaggerated. As a result, I decided to be cautious, not venturing out alone, and resolved to contact the police if needed. Ignoring his persistent calls, a few days later, my home intercom buzzed. Curiously, I grabbed my phone to be ready to call for help if needed, and to my shock, there stood Bob. He shouldn't have known my new address since our student days, so seeing him in front of my home sent chills down my spine. Relieved I hadn't opened the door, I inquired about his visit via the intercom. While I'd rather not have responded, he kept ringing the bell, causing my kids to become concerned. Hey! Since you wouldn't answer my calls, I thought I'd come over and talk directly. Bob said cheerfully, his smile unnerving me. I asked how he knew my address. And he mentioned having asked around our college acquaintances. It wasn't easy, you know. No one wanted to tell me. He admitted. While feeling angry at whoever revealed my address, I continued to deal with him through the intercom. It's inconvenient talking like this, let me in. He insisted. Despite his nagging, I refused entry and urged him to get to the point. When he finally started explaining, it was headache-inducing. He had called me to the wedding venue the day before the ceremony because his fiancée had vanished, and he wanted me to fill in for her to avoid cancellation fees. I met my fiancée on a free dating app. Maybe that's why she lacked common sense since it was free. Bob complained. While he ranted about his fiancée, I thought they seemed a perfect match, given his unreasonable actions. And sure enough, without a bride, the wedding was a disaster. Bob was apparently scolded by his family and relatives. And had to pay the cancellation fees. Now, since you didn't come, you should cover half of the costs. He claimed. What are you talking about? I exclaimed, my jaw dropping. Unbelievably, Bob wanted me to pay, saying that he was being generous in only asking for half. I had nothing to do with your wedding. I firmly refused, but he kept blaming me. Feeling overwhelmed and unable to handle the situation, I threatened to call the police. That seemed to deter him, and he finally seemed ready to leave, but not before saying, "You didn't show up when I asked, so I'm gonna send you the bill. Make sure you pay." However, Bob insisted that I pay him before finally leaving. The audacity of his demands, coupled with the fact that he'd come to my house uninvited, left me mentally exhausted. Once I confirmed he was gone, I felt drained and slumped down in relief. Later, a detailed invoice and a letter insisting on how much I should pay were sent to me. Feeling overwhelmed, I consulted my husband. He too was taken aback, not expecting anyone to act in such a manner. Together, we brainstormed how to handle the situation. A few days later, after leaving our kids at their grandparents', we headed to the address mentioned in the letter. Upon seeing the address, my husband felt a sense of recognition. When we rang the bell, a couple answered the door and were surprised to see my husband. "Why is the doctor here?" It turned out, my husband was their family physician. Never had I imagined that Bob's parents would know my husband, reminding me of how small the world can be sometimes. "We apologize for the sudden visit. But it seems your son has been pressuring my wife to pay for his wedding expenses," my husband explained succinctly. The couple, clearly shocked, hurriedly called Bob. While waiting for him, we provided a more in-depth explanation, showing them the invoice and letter. Seeing the documents, they sighed heavily and looked troubled. "We're so sorry about our foolish son's behavior. We had no idea he was doing something like this," they apologized. Soon, Bob arrived, nonchalantly asking, "Why did you call me back suddenly? Oh, did you come to pay?" Thinking we'd come to settle the bill, Bob looked pleased until his father reprimanded him. "What do you think you're doing, demanding money from someone who had nothing to do with your wedding?" Yet, Bob remained unfazed by his parents' scolding. At that point, my husband sternly said, "You've been harassing my wife to pay for your unrelated wedding expenses. We can report this to the police, you know." "Who the hell are you?" Bob responded initially dismissively. But when he learned that the stranger was my husband and also a doctor, his attitude shifted. When my husband revealed the reason for our visit, Bob instantly started to act flustered, trying to dodge the situation. "I wasn't harassing her. She just owes me that money," he declared. Despite our confrontation, he persisted with his demand, coming up with various justifications. It seemed like he genuinely believed what he was saying, making me think this was going to be a long conversation. I was feeling really frustrated. Just listening to Bob's side wouldn't resolve anything. He seemed unaffected even by his parents' scolding. So, I decided to start asking him methodically to understand why this was happening. Although he was a teacher and supposed to be mature, I felt drained having to handle him as if he were a child. "Why didn't you first reach out to your fiance before contacting me?" "Why?" I asked, believing he would have had numerous ways to contact his intended. I had been too eager to end the call when he'd phoned and hadn't inquired about this. "I tried many times but couldn't reach her. That's why I asked you to stand in," Bob replied nonchalantly. However, when both his parents and my husband gave him stern looks, he finally seemed to feel a bit uncomfortable. Towards me, he had a big attitude and was rather self-centered in his narrative. Yet, when cautioned by my husband, a doctor, he became more subdued. It appeared he respected titles more than people. The realization that such a person was teaching impressionable middle school students made me apprehensive. Still, I continued, now curious about his fiancée. Turned out, he had started dating her about 6 months ago after meeting on a dating app. After introducing her to his family, marriage was expected, and they decided to go with the flow. She apparently didn't have any immediate family, so the wedding talks progressed rapidly. They both had been on board at that time. But then she suddenly said she can't get married and became unreachable. Bob added, "We had everything ready for the wedding, and all the guests were invited. It's hard to call it off just because the bride isn't available." He recalled that I worked at a nearby middle school and assumed I'd still be single, hence his call. "You had a crush on me, right? So, I thought this would be perfect. Plus, you get to wear a free dress and enjoy a feast. It's all good, right?" Hearing Bob's absurd reasoning, I was taken aback. Firstly, I'd never been interested in him, and being assumed as perpetually single was irksome. His parents were clearly shocked by his audacious claims as well. Despite my growing mental distress, I continued to ask questions and eventually found out that his fiance's name was Lily Young and she worked as a nurse at the same hospital where my husband practiced. I probably know her. I'll let her know. My husband said, a puzzled expression crossing his face after hearing the name of the fiancé. From Bob's explanation, we couldn't grasp the full picture. Thus, we decided to reach out to the fiancé through my husband to discuss the matter. I believed that if the involved parties talked it out, the issue would be resolved. But just when I thought the matter was settled, I received a call from the fiancé a few days later. I heard from the doctor. I sincerely apologize for dragging you into this. Lily, who was Bob's fiancée, apologized in a calm and respectful manner for the chaos caused. Given the impression I had of Bob, I was secretly taken aback by Lily's courteous demeanor. I felt that perhaps my husband's odd reaction when mentioning he knew Lily was because he was aware that she wouldn't behave so irrationally. Lily expressed her wish to discuss the matter in person. I've heard his side, but it's still confusing. I'm sorry, but can we meet to clear things up? Feeling curious about how things escalated to this point, I agreed. We met at Bob's family home, where his parents, Lily, and I gathered to hear the whole story. We were informed that the wedding had actually been called off 2 months prior. Contrary to Bob's claim that it was only the day before, which shocked us. Moreover, after canceling the wedding, they had already paid the necessary fees. After wrapping up these matters, Lily had parted ways with Bob. However, out of the blue, he called her, insisting she attend the wedding ceremony the next day. Having received a sudden call from Bob asking me to stand in as the bride, I could relate to Lily's confusion. We had already canceled the wedding and were no longer seeing each other. When I asked why he was still going through with the ceremony, he just said something like, because it's all set up, which sounded like he was just joking around. I immediately hung up and blocked his number. It became evident that Bob's version of events was far from the truth, leaving everyone dumbfounded. We always thought you two were getting along just fine. Why didn't you tell us when you decided to call off the wedding? His father, still in disbelief, questioned the lack of communication and courtesy. Under normal circumstances, an apology or explanation would be expected. I was planning to come over and explain, but Bob insisted he would handle it. Lily responded. She was aware of how thrilled Bob's relatives had been about the wedding. However, after the breakup, she intended to formally address the matter, but Bob stopped her. You don't need to come over. It'll just upset my parents more. I'll handle it, Bob had told her. That's really lacking in manners, don't you think? She always believed that a final greeting was just common courtesy, but Bob strongly objected to it. Knowing how happy Bob's parents were when the engagement was announced, she just let it be. I should have at least secretly informed you. I'm so sorry. And she apologized for the whole mess. From all this, it became clear that Lily wasn't at fault. But everyone was puzzled why Bob was still preparing for a wedding even after canceling and paying the fees. Having canceled the wedding and breaking off the engagement, there seemed to be no clear reason why Bob still wanted to hold the ceremony. Then, with a straight face, Bob said, I already told people I was gonna get married. Backing out now would be so embarrassing. That's why I reversed the cancellation. Bob's reasoning was that it was too embarrassing to call off a wedding after announcing it, and he didn't want to pay the cancellation fees, hence, he continued with the wedding preparations. I thought asking someone to step in as a bride on your wedding day would be more embarrassing. I seriously began to wonder how Bob's mind works. The planner was happy when I said I wasn't gonna cancel the wedding, so I figured it's best to go on with it. He thought he could just have a regular wedding ceremony without actually getting legally married and, despite being separated, he contacted Lily to attend the ceremony. We have a fancy dress and a feast prepared. Why wouldn't you come? Everyone was taken aback by Bob's nonchalance. Holding what's supposed to be the most important ceremony of one's life just for show, and not telling even your close family and friends about it? Everyone was furious and demanded Bob to bear all the costs. After all the chaos caused by Bob's recklessness, this seemed only fair. But Bob started whining, claiming he didn't have that kind of money. Yet, where did the money Tom had paid for the wedding cancellation go? If the cancellation was reversed, that money should have been returned, so he should be able to pay for it. While I was pondering this, Lily suddenly grabbed Bob's wrist. You bought another one, didn't you? On Bob's wrist was an expensive-looking watch. The reason I called off our wedding is because of your outrageous spending, Bob. Spending $5,000 on a coat or $4,000 on shoes. I can't be with someone who doesn't listen and spends money recklessly. But it was the last piece and on sale. I had to buy it. I don't have any debts, so what's the big deal? Turns out, Bob used the cancellation money to splurge on luxury brands. He buys impulsively when he wants something. Certainly, with such behavior, their marital life would have been a tough one. Although he isn't in debt now, it seemed likely he would end up borrowing money just to satisfy his shopping urges. The teacher's salary isn't that high to afford such luxuries. Ordinarily, he'd be bankrupt by now. I wondered where he was getting all this money from. The person who was most infuriated by all of this was Bob's mother. You don't save, and you don't contribute a cent to the household. Is this where your money has been going? Bob lived at home because his workplace was nearby, relying on his parents for rent and even groceries. Initially, when he started his job, he wasn't earning much and didn't have significant savings, so his parents didn't particularly ask him to contribute financially to the household. But even after a decade, he still didn't contribute to household expenses and claimed to have no savings. His parents found this strange, but never imagined he was spending on such extravagances. They had been concerned, but trusted Bob when he assured them he was managing his finances and planning for the future. It's natural for parents to trust their grown-up children when they say they're okay. Bob, now in his 30s, neither helped with house chores nor contributed financially, fully relying on his parents. He could afford such luxuries by spending his entire salary on his whims. But with this wedding fiasco and learning about Bob's spending habits, his parents decided they won't pamper him anymore. Listen here. You'll pay every penny of the cancellation fee yourself. Don't you dare burden others with your problems. Bob's father yelled furiously, and Bob finally fell silent, nodding with a pale face. Later, it turned out that Bob had been asking several people for my address. Among them, someone who found his behavior suspicious reached out to me. Once I explained the situation, word of Bob's misconduct quickly spread among the school staff. From the beginning, parents didn't think highly of Bob at school as he didn't seem to take his students' concerns seriously. Students saw him as a friendly and approachable teacher, but not one to go to with serious concerns. As a result of the circulating rumors and the uncomfortable environment, it seems he resigned from his teaching position. His parents, having had enough of his irresponsibility, seemingly kicked him out of their home. Without any savings, Bob resorted to selling his luxury goods to find a place to live and is apparently now living in poverty. Moreover, he didn't have the money to pay the cancellation fee and ended up in debt. So, it looks like he's gonna be stuck in this poor lifestyle for a while. Because of all this, he apparently doesn't have the energy to come at me with any more crazy ideas. Furthermore, his parents, wondering where they went wrong in raising him, apologized to me. They assured me they'd keep a close eye on him so he wouldn't cause any more trouble. If his stricter parents are now watching over him, I doubt I'll ever encounter Bob again. I finally felt relieved, knowing I wouldn't have to deal with him. As for me, I've been busy with childcare as usual, but with my maternity leave coming to an end, I'm preparing to return to work. I always knew that small actions could lead to unexpected situations, but never thought I'd get dragged into something like this despite being cautious. I hope nothing like this ever happens again, but if it does, I've decided I'll handle it calmly and safely.